I've come with a video about unit planning within the MYP. This video is for teachers who are new to the MYP, maybe coming from a school with a different curriculum such as Common Core or GCSE. And I wanted to talk about some of the nuts and bolts of making a unit plan. And for the sake of time, I might be going quite quickly, but since this is in the form of a Google slide, it's fine to just pause the video in order to read for more detail. So a little bit about myself. Um, Again, this video is for new MYP teachers. I was once one. About 3 years ago, I switched from a Common Core school to an IB school, and I was very excited because I wanted to learn a new way of teaching. And there's so much spoken about the IB, and within the international school context where I work, many schools are making the transition. So when I was given the opportunity, I eagerly accepted it. When I started working at my school, they assigned me to work in individuals and societies, which I call INS. This is essentially social studies, language acquisition, and language and literature. So I had the opportunity to compare and contrast three subjects at once. In my second year, I was moved exclusively to individuals and societies, and the same is true for my third year. Throughout my time at the school, I've taken Cat 1, Cat 2, and Cat 3. These are the categories for IB trainings, the official ones. The last MYP one I took was the Managing Assessment training online, which they offer different styles, different formats of the training. Some of them are face to face, some of them are virtual, where you are live, and then online is at your own pace, which takes about a month to complete. The face-to-face options weren't possible for me because of the pandemic that is still going on. Contrary to what some news sources might say, it's still going on. So online option was the best for me in order to get the knowledge. And I particularly found the managing assessment training to be very beneficial in helping me to connect all of the different parts of the MYP. I also participated in the MYP authorization. So other teachers in my department and I worked together to make sure that our unit plans were of the correct standard. We worked closely with the curriculum coordinator to make sure that that happened, and they were reviewed, and our school did pass that authorization. So what they saw was sufficient enough for us to be authorized. Another thing as well, working in an international school, my school does not have an underlying curriculum. IB is technically called a framework, and the way that I understand it is that it's meant to overlay an existing framework. So it can work in conjunction with a national curriculum or Common Core, for example, that you could still carry out the IB and have these underlying standards as well. My school does not have these underlying standards. We only teach the MYP from grades 6 to 10. So this is what the students focus on, and this is where the teachers put all of their efforts into creating. And speaking of the teachers, at this international school, we have teachers from all over the world bringing their expertise and different backgrounds, but also different perspectives on what is the best way for students to learn. And I've observed teachers from, depending on their background, some of them may not be as welcoming to the ideas of the MYP. They might prefer a curriculum that's more spelled out, such as Common Core or GCSE, that dictate what exactly are the content and skills students should learn across each grade level. The IB framework isn't that detailed at the MYP level, so some teachers are more resistant, whereas others like me, who at the time were still fairly new in the profession, were able to accept it more readily. So that's a bit of my background, and therefore influences what I'm going to say in the following slides. In this video, I hope to talk about the different parts of the MYP unit plan, a little bit about the criterion, how assessments, summative assessments are made, as well as if I get off topic from one of those things, I apologize in advance. So for the MYP unit plans, there are several parts, one of which is the key concepts. Each subject has 4 of these key concepts. My subject area in this video is related mostly to individuals and societies, but the main underlying principles can be applied to any subject. For INS, from this list of 16, we have 4, which are change, global interactions, systems, and time, place, and space. Change is looking at how a process has developed over time. That could be an example. Global interactions, of course, how nations and other actors interact with one another, including through the process of globalization. Systems, different ways that maybe how organizations are formed or how resources are extracted. And time, place, and space, in my experience, has related primarily to history or how a particular actors, such as women, how their position or their outlook has changed from one era to another. So within those 4 key concepts sort of dictate what your unit will largely be about. Some schools have the standard that each of the 4 units that are taught throughout the year relate to one of these different key concepts. I don't believe that is official, but it is a good practice when thinking about the course as a whole to have units that relate to these, like all of the 4 key concepts within your subject area. And for each subject, there's also a set of related concepts. The related concepts are specific to that particular class and later on that particular unit. So again, I am an INS teacher, and the way that our school teaches INS is through integrated humanities or social studies. So one of the reasons I love the class is that we get to dabble into different areas of the social sciences. We have some units that are very heavy towards history or exclusively history. We have some that do focus on geography, such as the environment. We also have units that deal with globalization and later on with economics. So in INS, Integrated Humanities, we can talk about a variety of different topics, which is, I think, beneficial for the students. But in other schools, INS might be geography exclusively, or they might have geography as the INS course for a year group. Same is true for history. INS might be a history class where they do local history one year, and then the world, ancient civilizations another year, and then the world post World War II another year, and so on and so on. So for INS Integrated Humanities, we have these 12 related concepts. Causality, choice, culture, equity, globalization, identity, innovation and revolution, perspective, power, processes, resources, and sustainability. And for building a unit, your unit is also going to focus on 1 or 2 of these related concepts. I haven't the experience of seeing a unit either at my school or through the trainings I've taken that dealt with more than 2 related concepts, because I believe the unit gets too large. It's too much to encompass within that specific amount of time. And also there is something called global context. These 6 global contexts are the same for all of the MYP courses, the same for math, science, arts, INS, language and literature, and so on. And for your unit, it will also relate to one of these global contexts. For example, when we did a unit on that dealt with the Industrial Revolution, we chose scientific and technical innovation. And when we did a unit on sustainable urban development, we looked at globalization and sustainability as the global context. So your unit will deal with one of these global contexts, and these global contexts are further broken down into what are called explorations. So, for example, this one, orientation in space and time, students can explore a variety of different things, such as personal histories, how discoveries have influenced the trajectory of humanity. This sounds very pertinent in science, for example. Also, the interconnectedness of individuals and civilizations, so on, so on. There's explainers like this that are available on the MyIB website, which teachers of the IB receive a login and they have access to a very important document called the Subject Guide, which is about 80 pages long that goes through all of the particulars as well as helpful explainers like where I found the explorations. So for orientation in space and time, there's an explanation of what are some of the things that students can learn, and then the explorations are more specific. So I might be teaching a unit under the global context of orientation in space and time, but the students will mostly be learning about civilizations and social histories and heritage. This was, I believe, we used this exploration when either this one or personal and cultural expression, when we had a unit talking about endangered and extinct languages. That was a part of it. And I guess you could either use this global context and exploration, or you could put it under personal and cultural expression. That language is an element of culture. Up to the teacher and how they decide to construct the unit. The last essential piece before we move on to assessment is the statement of inquiry. And the statement of inquiry is a statement, a sentence, which includes all three of the parts that I've just described. It has it relates to the key concept, the related concept, and the global context. And really, I see it as a sentence that the students can say if someone asks them what they are learning about. If an admin walked into the classroom and said, "Oh, kids, what are you studying in here?" then the kids could say the statement of inquiry. And that also is helpful to the teacher when planning learning engagements with the students. Do these learning engagements relate to the statement of inquiry? Will they help the students to have a better idea of, to realize the statement of inquiry, how dynamic it is, and so on. And throughout the unit, the teacher will emphasize the statement of inquiry, will reflect on the statement of inquiry, and it helps them to make conscious decisions that will facilitate students' acquisition of what the statement of inquiry is. And later on, I'll be showing examples in the unit plan of how I put these different parts together. Another feature of MYP unit planning is that they use understanding by design. This was written about in a book by Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe, and I apologize if I've said his name incorrectly. But understanding by design is also colloquially known as back planning, where when planning a unit, the teacher first thinks about what they want the students to become at the end of the unit, or what they want the students to produce, or what they want the students to know at the end of the unit. And from there, from the end point, they plan backwards. They think of all of the learning engagements, how they relate to one another, what learning takes place from each one that will help them to complete the summative assessment to the best of their ability. This quote here, the backward design framework suggests that instructors should consider overarching learning goals and how students will be assessed prior to consideration of how to teach the content. For this reason, backward design is considered a much more intentional approach to course design than traditional methods of design. This website by Ryan Bowen had a lot of helpful information explaining more about understanding by design if you may not be familiar with it. And I think that the way that understanding by design relates to other forms of instruction, such as Common Core, is that instead of seeing instruction as small pieces that eventually, like small pieces of information that the students need to acquire as they go along, it's more of focusing on the overall vision and then what are the steps to getting that vision? What are the steps of having the students realize your academic vision? So that is another key part of the MYP unit plan. And speaking of where we want the students to be, the summative assessment in the MYP is quite particular. The summative assessment will not be a paper exam. It will also not be an exam where the students need to get 80% in order to pass, and then that 80% is converted to the MYP, the criterion scale, for example. But the summative assessment looks like an authentic assessment, sometimes also called PBL, which could be problem-based learning or project-based learning. But the students will engage in an assignment and an assessment which mirrors what they can do in the real world outside of the school walls. And the summative assessment, the teacher would first think about what sort of summative assessment they want the students to complete. The summative assessment probably has a couple of parts, at least it does, the way that I create them for the units. But they should be engaging and fun and realistic and incorporate the skills that they've learned throughout the unit. The summative assessments also should express the statement of inquiry, and they should also be able to relate to one of the explorations within the global context. The summative assessments, I've made another video about how to create a summative assessment somewhere on my channel. And the summative assessments relate to 4 criteria. And someone in the previous video commented that I say criteria and I confuse criteria and criterion. I know what the difference is, but when doing these sorts of videos, I sometimes mix them up. But altogether, there are 4 criteria, A, B, C, D. Each one is different according to the subject, but a key feature is that they need to be assessed. Each of the 4 criteria need to be assessed twice a year. In my school, that means we have 2 semesters in the academic year. We assess the 4 criteria in the first semester, and then we assess them again in the second semester. The rule is that they need to be assessed at least once, but they can be assessed more than once. For example, one of the criterion C, communicating, I usually assess it 4 times throughout the year because the summative assessments require the students to either write or to speak. So it just seems like it's a good opportunity to facilitate that skill. A unit will have 1 to 2 summative assessments, depending on your school's academic calendar. And each of the summative assessments, they are specific to the subject, and there's sometimes different rules related to them. For INS, our criterion B, which is investigating, that criteria, one of the special considerations is that it cannot be assessed by itself. So I couldn't create a summative assessment that only dealt with criterion B, but I would have to do maybe B and C or B, C, and D. And again, I'll show an example of that on later on in the video. Each of the criterion, in addition to being each of the criteria, in addition to being a skill, is broken down more specifically into what are called strands, and those strands are indicated with Roman numerals that can also be broken apart and assessed across different summative assessments. For example, for INS, criterion A is knowing and understanding, and there are two strands, which are number one, to use terminology in context, and number two, demonstrate knowledge and understanding of subject-specific content and concepts through descriptions, explanations, and examples. So if I were to create an assessment for this criterion, I might just use the first strand and save the second one for later in the semester. Criterion B is investigating. And another thing about these criterion, they increase in difficulty. The first in MYP 1, they're simpler, and then MYP 3, they're in the middle, and then MYP 5, they are more detailed. So for B, investigating, the first one is formulate a clear and focused research question and justify its relevance. So this one would be from MYP 5, whereas MYP 1, they just need to look into a research question. They don't need to create their own research question. Criterion C for INS is communicating. Students need to communicate information and ideas using an appropriate style for the audience and purpose, structure information and ideas in a way that is appropriate to the specified format, and document sources of information using a recognized convention. So for criterion C, if I'm assessing this one, I'll have the students do a presentation, or I'll have the students write an essay or a report, or I'll have the students create an infographic. And then for C3, I'll have the students do a reference page. And our school, we use APA citation. So throughout the years of the course, I have multiple assessments where the students need to create a reference page with guidance. And that's one of the things that I'm assessing within the subject. The last one is thinking critically, where the students need to analyze sources, they need to recognize different points of view and what the implications are, and they need to analyze maybe something like a graph, for example, and they need to also demonstrate that they can take information from different places and synthesize it into an argument. So identifying what information they will benefit their argument, which one will be a counter to it, and to make a distinction and use the pieces that are necessary for the argument while acknowledging the other ones, the ones that are against it. And also for the summative assessments, we use the GRASP model at my school. This was mentioned in the CAT 3 training. It was provided as guidance. It's not required, but it is helpful for making authentic assessments. When planning assessments, identifying the goal of the assessment, the role of the students, the audience that they're making the assessment for, what situation they're in, what they're creating, such as are they making a Google slide, or are they making a poster, or are they writing a report, as well as the standard. So which criteria the assessment will be under. There are other things that go into unit planning as well. Within the IB, there are a set of skills called approaches to learning, or ATL skills. Are there opportunities in your unit to reinforce these skills? Also, are there chances for service learning, which is a requirement for the MYP? This might be an opportunity to liaise with the service learning coordinator at your school. Are there opportunities for disciplinary learning? Within the MYP, there's a disciplinary unit each year. Ours takes place over a period of a week where we pair with another subject and the students do a special project. For my school, we pair with art. INS pairs with art, and we do a project related to the Renaissance. Um, INS talking more about the technical innovations and the changes in philosophy, such as humanism, where INS, whereas art would talk about the change, perspective and depth and some of the key sculptures and so on. And also, is there an opportunity to integrate the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN? Are there chances for a field trip? All of these parts can go into the unit, which is quite a large endeavor. But I'll show you a unit that I was able to create very quickly. So here is an example of our unit planning template. We have teachers, the subject group, the title of the unit, the MYP year, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as well as the unit duration, how many hours of instruction it will take. For my school, IMS, we have 3 hours with the students per week. So that I can think of, is this unit going to take a month or a month and a half? And then there's spaces for the key concept, related concept, the global context, and here it's written as strand. It could also be exploration, and the statement of inquiry. Another feature are inquiry questions. I didn't go over these before, but these are also learning goals for individual lessons in the form of questions. So, what are some factual questions, such as in what year or who or when? What are some conceptual questions, some of the bigger ideas? And then what are some debatable questions, some areas where students may not, may begin to form their own opinion. These questions may not have a specific answer, but the student should be able to use evidence in order to justify their responses. Below, we have an area for the summative assessment. What are the, I'm not sure, oh, there's someone had a typo. A, B, C, and this is D. This is D. What are the criteria that you are assessing? Here's a description of the summative assessment, preferably using the GRASS model. And how does it relate to the statement of inquiry and the global context exploration? Below, there's an opportunity to indicate what ATL skills that you will be focusing on during the unit. And further down are places where you can note the learning experience or the individual tasks that the students will complete. Also, the formative assessment, as well as opportunities for differentiation. A lot of the differentiation that I've been using relates to when I have an assignment, I might give students the opportunity to do a different type of product, such as some students can have to write some students may choose to write their response, whereas I'll let other students do a recording. Or I might, if it's a longer reading, I might provide a recording for the students, especially the ones who have issues with their reading ability. Or you might decide to include large font, depending on the needs of your students, how you differentiate. Alternative assignments, also assignments for the most able or the academically gifted students. And below that, resources to keep track of, links to those YouTube videos and websites and graphs and whatever it is that you want to incorporate throughout the unit. So here is a sample. I put this unit together, the bare bones of this unit together in about 30 minutes. So this is not a detailed unit plan that would take me a couple of days to complete, but I wanted to go ahead and get down on paper what are some of the key points that I would look into for the unit. So this one would be for INS, Integrated Humanities Focus, MYP 5, which is equivalent to grade 10. The unit title I came up with is "What's Yours is Mine and What's Mine Yours?" question mark. It doesn't need to be creative, but it can be if it's going to attract, increase student engagement. So a phrase or some joke can also work, whatever gets the students' attention. So for the key concept, remember there were four that I could choose from. I chose to look at systems. For the related concepts, I chose two. You can choose one or two. I've never seen one with three. I think it's possible, but it might get it would be for a longer unit. And I chose equity and resources. And then for the global context, I chose from the six: fairness and development, and the exploration, authority, security, and freedom. And I've combined all of these three parts into one sentence, which is a statement of inquiry. And I bolded the parts that are directly related. So conflicts over the equitable use of resources within global systems raise questions about the fairness of rules and who has the authority to enforce them. So again, I came up with this in about 30 minutes or so I might want to tweak it. One of the things I would think about is my statement of inquiry so ambiguous that students would have difficulty grasping it? I would also think about, especially when working with students, ELLs, English language learners, would they be able to fully understand comprehend rather the statement of inquiry? And the equitable use relates to the related concept, system, the key concept, fairness, the global context, and authority, the exploration. It does not have to be so explicit, your incorporation of all three parts. It can be an allusion, or you could use a synonym for these, especially if it helps to maybe simplify the statement to facilitate students' comprehension. But I generally like to explicitly state them and bold them to make sure that I'm using all of the parts. Some of these inquiry questions, what resources are in high demand, maybe the students will learn. I might provide them an article on rare metals or petroleum. How do international organizations lead to cooperations between states? We might look at an article on the formation of the United Nations. And then, should membership in international organizations be required? We might look at some examples of nations that would like to be part of the UN but aren't, that have alternative statuses, such as Palestine or Western Sahara, for example. Is environmental protection more important for MEDCs than LEDCs? So this idea of if the Industrial Revolution happened earlier for industrialized nations, would it not be fair for nations who are LEDCs to um, go through the same steps, even if that meant them being polluters? Well, no definite answer to these questions, but hopefully it would get the students discussing amongst each other when provided with the stimulus of your learning activity, your formative assessment. So then for the summative assessment, I decided for this one I would assess criterion B, C, and D. And that means, therefore, my assessment will be quite large. My summative assessment, I use the GRASP model. Students are freelance investigative journalists who have been hired to write an explainer with graphics. So I'm clearly wanting to tell students what they're going to produce at the end of it. For Time Magazine, about one of several conflicts over resources from the provided list. I would give students a list of um, resource conflicts, such as China's Nine Dash Line, could be one of their options. They want to raise awareness about the conflict and predict a possible outcome, or propose a solution. This part, I provided two goals for the students. This is, in my opinion, an example of differentiation where the students can decide which way they want to take their explainer. The explainer will be assessed according to criterion B, C, and D. Because I'm assessing for criterion B, one of the requirements is that the students go through a research action plan. So that would be one of the documents that I'd have the students work through in order to articulate the exact manner in which they want to write their explainer. Communicating, we'd work with a graphic, not a graphic organizer, some sort of template that would help the students to organize into different paragraphs, into different parts. And then thinking critically, the students will encounter a lot of resources. Maybe one of the things that I would have them do is to evaluate their resource in terms of origin, purpose, value, and limitation, which is one of the strands in criterion D. So for this assessment, I don't have to assess all of criterion D, for example, but I might decide to just assess two strands or two parts of criterion D. I have to do criterion C because I want criterion C3 because I want the students to produce a reference page at the end of it. And then I explained explicitly the assessment deals with the issues of security on a national or local scale, and they will investigate the motives of various actors involved in the conflict. That goes back to my exploration of authority and power. And the ATL skills, there's a list of ATL skills that are the same throughout the IB from PYP to DP. One of them is critical thinking. The students will need to break down large concepts and projects into component parts and combine parts logically as appropriate. The students need to have them work on their information literacy skills, utilizing appropriate multimedia technology to create effective presentation and representation. And they'll focus on their communication skills using appropriate forms of writing for different purposes and audience. For the learning experiences, for the sake of time, I wrote that they would be practiced in the summative assessment, but you could also use different formative assessments, and I would use different formative assessments that help the students practice these skills before they do the summative assessment so that they have a point of reference. Some of the learning activities, of course, I would spend, this is the bulk of the planning for the unit plan. I already have the summative assessment, so now I need to do the understanding by design, the back planning part, and think of what are the learning engagements that the students need to do. So one of the things would be for the explainer, they need to produce a graphic. So I would have them transform numerical data, excuse me, transform numerical data into a graph, some sort of visual representation that's easier to digest. I might have the student do a debate as part of their formative assessment. They might have to complete an origin, purpose, value, and limitation chart about an article, preferably in this case, an opinion article, so that the students have more chances to recognize bias. They might have a DBQ about Malthusian perspective on research, resources, and population. They might do a group interview, and for the larger unit, I would put these in order and think about scaffolding. I would collect my resources that I'm going to use. There aren't many textbooks for INS, but using the textbook could be a resource as well as digital ones as well. And then a differentiation approach. One thing, instead of maybe the students having to write an explainer, I might take the students who have, I might allow some of the students to do a TED Talk instead, where they could give a speech instead of having to write out their ideas, depending. And at the end of the unit, there's opportunities to reflect. There's a list of questions here that a teacher could consider while making the unit before they actually teach it, and then revisiting it while they're teaching, and then after they teach. And there are lots of surprises when actually teaching a unit. The after teaching the unit part is very helpful when teaching the unit next year. There's definitely areas that can be improved, issues that maybe the teacher didn't anticipate in advance, and those keeping a record of that reflection is very useful. So I hope that this has been helpful. It's been quite a while. It's a long video, but if you've made it to the end, I'd be curious to see within the comments what are some of the areas that you still have questions about, and also to hear from even more experienced IB teachers who've been doing it for longer than the 3 years that I have. What are some of their perspectives and insights, and or especially how have they enhanced their units from year to year? So thank you very much and see you next time. Have a great day.